Good afternoon. I'm Karina Rotenstein. I'm the producer of the TIFF Industry Conference, and welcome to our last session of the day. And you are in for a real treat, because we are here with Nina Yang Bongiovi. You chose correctly to be here. To begin, we'd like to acknowledge that today's events are taking place on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of New Credit, on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat. And we are so grateful to work in the community. Thank you. Now, before we get started, there's no professional photography or video recording inside the studio. However, we are taking care of that for you. We are live streaming this, so hello to our online audiences tuning in. And also, do feel free to take notes. There's going to be lots of stuff to talk about. And also tweet using the hashtag TIFF18. So please connect and continue the conversation after the conversation. Today's Mogul session is supported by Betty Ann Heggie, and Betty Ann is a TIFF board member and a fierce, tremendous advocate for women in the industry. So thank you very much, Betty Ann, for your support of our Mogul session today and the sessions at the industry conference. So how many people went to the Share Her Journey rally this morning? Yes, yes. So of course the journey is not over. We end it here. We don't end it here. But today, there's no better way to celebrate today than with Nina Yang Bongiovi. For nearly 20 years, she has been an influential force in this industry with a discerning eye for groundbreaking stories and thrilling new directors. She spent the early part of her career co-producing and connecting the US and Chinese film industries, one of the very first to do so. In 2009, she and Forest Whitaker, her producing partner, created significant productions, and they have gone on to produce some of the most incredible work, including Fruitvale Station, Dope. I love Dope. So great. Songs My Brother Taught Me, Roxanne Roxanne, and Sorry to Bother You. I mean, God, she's a busy woman. And honestly, we cannot be any more happy that she is taking time out of her very, 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 very busy schedule to join us here at TIFF. And hosting her today is Keisha Imani Cameron. She is the Chief Talent Development Officer at the Ghetto Film School, an award-winning not-for-profit. Keisha also created the Focus Features Africa First short film program and has an extensive background in development, having worked at New Line Cinema and Walden Media. And she's also a producer as well. Now, before we get to the conversation, why don't we take a look at some of the work that Nina has produced?
5, 4,
game changer, trailblazer, mogul. Please welcome to the stage Keisha Imani Cameron and Nina Yang Bongiovi.
Hey TIFF, how we doing? Welcome Nina, so excited to talk to you today. What I want to do is actually have a conversation about trust in three ways. One, how do you come to trust yourself as a person and as a creator? The trust you have to develop between you and your relationship with your director and your partners, and trust in terms of looking forward in the industry and some of the changes I know that you want to see implemented that a lot of us, I'm sure, want as well, and how we hold on until that comes to pass. But first I want to talk about a little bit about your background and growing up. What was your, growing up in your household, what was your sort of first interaction with entertainment? Like, what did music look like in your house? What did films or TV look like in your house? What was your first exposure to media?
My first exposure to media are Chinese soap operas.
Nice.
And I grew up in a Mandarin-speaking household, and I always remember my mom having those Chinese soap operas on every day, you know, and but at a young age, I always looked at those soap operas and I'll be like criticizing it. I'm like, man, that's overacting, you know, or man, the lighting's really bad. Right. But I didn't know what I was talking about at the time. But that was my first exposure into the media world, but never thought that it's something I can do as a career, because culturally we're not brought up to say you can pursue something in the film industry or television industry.
Do you remember some of the first films that you saw that were like influential, or that made you start being aware of film and cinema? Well,
influential, culturally different from you know, most people growing up in North America, but influential to me were watching martial arts films. That's what I grew up on. And then when my family immigrated to United States in Los Angeles, I remember growing up watching a lot of Kung Fu theater, where on the weekends, you know, I would go watch like, you know, 10 films and going from theater to theater, and that was my love, was martial arts kung fu movies, and that really influenced me. And
in what way? What was...
in the fact that I just loved it so much, and I was like, I wonder how, if I ever can do something to make movies, but never knew about the path.
Right.
Yeah.
And is there a film that's sort of out now or current now that you wish you would have had or seen growing up at that time, or?
If there's a film that I wish I could have seen growing up, would be like Crazy Rich Asians.
Sure.
For the fact, because I'm like, wow, look at Asian people on screen.
Right.
Oh, what a concept.
What a novel idea.
You know? So.
And so you mentioned you moved from Taiwan to East LA when you were 5?
Yes.
So tell me about that experience. So what did you learn about yourself, or what lessons did you sort of glean from that time?
What lessons I've learned at that very young age was that I was an immigrant, that I wasn't welcomed. When my mom worked with social workers to try to get an apartment for us, went from places to places where people didn't want to give us a place to rent. And finally, the apartment that took us was actually a senior citizens apartment. And then that's where we first resided in LA.
And is there, how has that sort of outsider status stayed with you, or how do you handle that? Do you still feel like you carry that, or?
I do.
Yeah, what's your relationship to that outsider status?
I feel like I carried that throughout my life. I always felt a certain amount of anger towards prejudice, racism, because seeing what my mother went through, who didn't speak English, when people were really rude to her. I mean, tying it all the way back to like Vietnam War, people were saying really horrible things to her, and this is like in the late 70s, and I was just confused and angry, and also not understanding why she never spoke to me about it or how she felt about it. And I think that kind of manifested itself later on in my career. Yeah.
But it's interesting, generationally, there were things that just weren't discussed.
Exactly.
So when did you start, whether it was about that literally, or when do you feel like you started speaking or advocating for yourself in a different way that was kind of a break from what you had seen generationally?
I think that when you enter the entertainment industry, you have to build leverage for you to have a voice. If I spoke up about it very early on, probably would have been ostracized, you know, in certain communities or sectors of the business, but it's just about getting into the business, learning the trade, and knowing it well enough to one day I will be able to have a voice. And coincidentally, my first job and the first part of my career was working in Kung Fu martial arts films in Hong Kong.
So let's talk about that, because you went back to Hong Kong to do work in martial arts. So tell me why that was, I mean, I have a sense now why that was important to you, but what did you really hope to get from that experience? What were you seeking at the time when you made that transition?
That was a really conscious transition on my point, for the fact that I wanted to learn what production was all about.
Right.
Because I went to grad school at USC. The first job I had was, an offer I had and worked for a year, was at Warner Brothers as a marketing analyst. And I really hated it. And I was like, this is not movie making. So when I graduated, I called a couple of friends of mine in Asia and said, do you think I can be an assistant over there in one of your martial arts films? And they're like, sure, you're crazy, but yeah, come on, you're leaving the Warner Brothers job. You know, you have a nice job, what are you doing? So I did that. I made that conscious effort, going there, you know, starting from the very bottom, but what I did was I was able to learn what every crew member did on a film. And I was inspired that this is a craft, this is a trade that everybody can pursue, and there's a specialty in it. And I was inspired to be on set, to see something get made from beginning to end. And one thing that catapulted me to come back to the States was, I said, man, these action sequences are so fantastic, they're so phenomenal, if they only had a good script.
Right.
That's right.
So is that when you left, had you already decided I'm going to be a producer, or did that happen in that process of working on those films?
That happened in a very organic way, because I actually never understood what a producer does. I see them
Many
on
of us
set.
still don't.
Yeah, exactly. It was just, I see people running around, you know, they're talking to the director. It has to do with finance, maybe.
Right.
Yeah, so.
There's some phone calls involved.
Some phone calls,
right.
And it's all about relationships and connections, but I never understood what a real producer did and does, you know, so.
So, it was interesting because speaking of sort of being a producer and how those relationships works, I know when Ryan Coogler visited Ghetto Film School, actually, back when he was doing Fruitvale, shout out to Fruitvale, he discussed in sort of great lengths the relationship between himself and his producers, and you especially, and just how important it is for a director to find a good producer, someone that they're in alignment with. So if you could talk a little bit about, like, you know, how you go about finding talent. I know, like, just your taste and your passion for finding young artists is well-renowned, and you're very committed and passionate about that. So talk about that process of how you find talent and how you build that relationship with them, because it seems that you pick not just projects, but people.
Absolutely people first, to me. With Ryan, I think Ryan was the beginning of really my career. After 10 years of trying to figure it out, trying to work in Hong Kong, China film industry, and then struggled for several years before I met Forest Whitaker, Ryan was like the catalyst of kind of awakening of, I need to be able to support voices of color, filmmakers who usually are looked over, and meeting him, just seeing, you can feel his soul, seeing his short films compelled me and Forrest to just pretty much throw out all typical logic of business out the window and say, we have to support him. How do we get his first feature made? So that helped me hone my skills of identifying talent, and it has to do with the actual person. And as I matured in my career, I was able to read people better, and also really trust my gut, and also I really rely on the universe to bring me good people, and then learning how to walk away from bad situations or a certain bad energy. So I kind of go by that. I know it sometimes sounds a little crazy, but I feel like
not at all.
Okay, good.
They're long-term relationships.
Yeah.
I mean, people I think don't always realize how long it actually takes to get a film made, even an independent film, even
it's a miracle.
Right, they're all little miracles.
Yeah.
Even allegedly films with big attachments and things like that can still take years, on a good day. And who you're in that process with, liking them and having real connection to them is important.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, I think not only liking the filmmaker you're working with, I mean, really loving them and caring about their future is something that proved very successful for us, where I think it's a maternal instinct that comes into play, where I was always just worried about Ryan's career, when we were making it. And I remember Forrest said to me, why are you so worried about him? He's gonna be fine. He's gonna be one of the biggest voices of his generation. And he's like, true talent always will rise on top. And I was like, oh, okay, and look at him today,
Right.
But I felt that with Boots Riley, which is what Sorry to Bother You, was just getting to know him, understanding his struggle, but also knowing that he has talent.
So what for you are you've mentioned a few of them already, but what for you are the components, if it was sort of like a checkbox list of either values or components that you feel like really make up a powerful director-producer connection, and conversely, what are red flags for you? Like, what is it that when you see certain things or notice certain things, you go, okay, this is not a good match for me?
Yeah, I think when you meet a talent like a filmmaker, writer, director, if their goal is to become famous, you kind of just go, maybe the wrong trajectory. Right. If their goal is to create a film that's going to create dialogue, that's going to change culture and impact culture, it's a different type of mission. And the red flag, if someone goes, if I make this movie, I'm going to make you guys a ton of money, and that in line makes that person famous, that usually doesn't work, because I feel that intention and purpose of a filmmaker is extremely important, and to understand somebody's intention and purpose of why this person chose to tell this story and why this person wants to become a director, that is more important than anything. And also, you have to be with the filmmaker for years, and you want to be able to, be friends with them, but also be an advisor and an ally on every level. So all those come into play. But I think it has to do with intention and purpose.
Right.
Yeah.
And what do you see? What other traps? I mean, it sounds like sort of the wrong intention, like being focused on like fame or thinking about what other people like, or would want from them. Is sort of a bit of a red herring for directors. Like, what other things that you see directors doing that you feel like they're doing themselves a disservice, or what other sort of mistakes do you see young directors making?
I think it's different levels of trying to catch a trend is a problem, or not being authentic to themselves, especially if you're a filmmaker of color. Sometimes I've met filmmakers who say, I don't want to do something within my culture because I want to prove that I can do something outside my culture. And I go, well, maybe your first film should be something you really know and you really connect with, so audiences can feel the authenticity come through. So that's a common trap. Or following a trend. So, Fruitvale Station is done, then I'll get 20 projects about police brutality. And I'm like, gosh, you got to try to
move the conversation forward.
Move the conversation. What else can you talk about? It could be in the same vein, but don't be similar stories. So that's why when we pivoted immediately to dope. And everybody's like, that's your next film? Yeah, that's our next film. And then we pivot again and we pivot again because it's always trying something different that we haven't seen in the marketplace.
In the context of the relationships that you've had that have been working where you have that trust, like what have been some of the hardest, or can you remember one of maybe the hardest thing you've had to say to a director, or one of the hardest conversations you've had to have, and how you navigate the tough times even in a good relationship?
When you say hardest, there's so many.
Yeah.
All these things just came at me, and I had a bit of a panic attack.
You mean there's not just one seminal story of how hard it is?
Because every film has its own animal, and it has its own challenges. I remember making Dope, and I'm like, gosh, this is the hardest film ever, right? Because I'm like, Fruitvale's all love, we all just fought for it. And then after that, it was like, Roxanne, I'm like, I can't believe how hard it is to film in New York, and all the challenges. And I'm like, and then I go to Sorry to Bother You, I'm like, this is the toughest film ever. Yeah. so those are the challenges that come at me, but to me, it makes me a better producer every time, and to know how to solve problems. But one tough thing to say to a director is, day 4 on Sorry to Bother You, and I'm like, I don't know if we'll see the end. Yeah, it's like, but I didn't say that to him, but I felt that, and I said, my God, we're over budget. Within the first few days, we're not making our days. Seems like the schedule's a little bit off, and what do I do? And how do I protect Boots to keep doing what he's doing, to stay focused on the movie, but then you need your director's help. I would have to say, I need your help, and tell him about the entire situation, and say, we may have to trim some scenes, or we may have to trim some locations, but this is what we're gonna do to make it to the end. And we're gonna have these changes. You're gonna see changes in personnel, and don't get alarmed. But it was just those moments, and it's hard, but luckily someone like Boots Riley he's a first-time filmmaker, but he's an old soul. He's been around in the music industry, and so he knew how to work with chaos, and he worked with me on solving those problems. But then his thing was, I need 3 more days. And I go, I know, because looking at the schedule, we do need those 3 more days. Then it became my fight with my investors and say, the budget will increase because this is what we need. And I have to take that burden on and pretty much tell all my investors, you have to trust me, so.
And so talk about that process. There's both almost the internal process, like we're already on board and people have, already at the table, but you have your trust with your director, you found your project, and now you have to go into this universe that we know that doesn't always see the world the way that you might see it. And I'm sure there's lots of conversations you have to have with people who don't necessarily, what we call, get it.
Yes, a lot.
Yeah. And so what's your approach to that conversation? How do you enroll people, basically, in your vision, your passion for your projects? Like, how do you approach finding partners that you may have to sort of convince and bring on board, who may not even understand what you're trying to do?
Right. I feel like most people would not understand what a producer fully does. Investors will come in not understanding the actual logistics it takes to see something on screen. And it's such a long process from beginning to end. And it's about, but also a good producer will need to have the knowledge of what film finance is about. You can't be reckless and say, I need X amount of money more because of these 3 extra days. It's like, I need this much because I can have this complete film and it's gonna be amazing, and have that commitment, and also, like someone like me, I put myself on the line. I am liable for this film. I am liable for taking money from investors and convincing the investors to invest in this filmmaker. So it's about showing that commitment to investors that so they don't waver. Many, they'll come at you. They came at me, and I think one of my attorneys is in the audience. I would call him.
You travel with him everywhere?
No, I call him and I say, what happens if I punch somebody in the throat? And then, and then he'll say, please don't do that. Please don't do that. And so, and then we.
Could that be the title of your book?
Yeah, and it's just having these wonderful allies and advisors that have been with me since Fruitvale Station
Sure.
to now, knowing they have their trust in me, but also advising me on how to handle certain situations better instead of losing my cool. And then, but I can say that every time I had situations with investors doubting the process. They're not doubting the process at the premiere. They're getting drunk because they know they got a hit film. Yeah.
That was just too real. I had to take that in for a second. But it's interesting though, because how do you manage? Because I can only imagine in my dream version of your life, my fantasy of what your life is, that it's great here, because the movies have been done and you've got a great reel and resume, but in the day-to-day process of sword and spear and going in, it can be a little aggravating and frustrating and lonely. I can only imagine.
Lonely.
How do you? It sounds like you have your lawyer on speed dial. But how do you maintain?
Yeah.
How do you handle that day to day?
It is a lonely process.
Yeah.
That's the word you use. It is a lonely process because it's a grind.
Yeah.
It's not glamorous.
No.
I'm not a producer who just shows up for lunch, twice on, during the process, because we're real hands-on producers who carry the project from beginning to end. And it's like a child that you raise. And it does get lonely when you have everything against you. You have budget, scheduling, infighting on crew, politics.
Sure.
So there's an overwhelming amount of issues that we have to solve. And also be very hyper conscious of every movement we take and what the results are. So and then at the same time care about the creative, be in front of the monitor to see how it looks, and being very excited about it and conveying that message to people who invested in you. So it's a multitude of emotions a producer goes through. It's probably because I care so much about these filmmakers and the projects that we produce that it's maybe a work hazard for me. But every time I do see something come out the way it does, I'm just so proud, and I'm also so proud that it launches so many people's careers, not only the filmmakers, but many stars in our films.
Sure.
Where, for example, Roxanne, if it was a traditional studio film, nobody would have allowed us to cast Shantae Adams as the lead.
And she's amazing.
Yeah, and she's amazing.
Yeah.
So, and to see her career rise.
Right.
She was here last night. Yeah.
And so talk a little bit about, because one of the things that I also appreciate about you is that you have a very sort of global sort of hand. Like your the company that finances significant is based in China, and you have, it seems, like a very sort of borderless take on producing and how you bring projects together, and your partnership with Forest. Can you talk a little bit about, like, just structurally, how that partnership was formed and how you guys approach your slate in the broad sense?
Yeah, so Forrest and I are producing partners, and we're really the creative force behind Significant Productions. We have a investment group out of Taiwan, Hong Kong, Shanghai, who supported our film since Fruitvale Station. They're Asian Americans. And I'm very proud to say that, because a lot of times, especially today, there's a lot of common conversations talking about, Asian Americans or Asians aren't kind to people of color, African Americans, and African Americans are tweeting me or on my social media tell Asian people to be, tell Asian people to be nice. Be nice. And I'm like, my God, I'm like this cultural bridge. So on the global level, I'm very proud of that, but it also allows me to speak to a lot of Asian Americans and say, do you know that all of our 5 films were supported by Asian Americans? And tell my African American friends, like, listen, let's create dialogue. Because as we work together, we have more leverage in media, politics, in Hollywood. So it's really, really important. So I use our films as examples of that on a global level. We are also expanding into more inclusiveness with Asian American communities. We have a couple projects in development. We have one in post, which is what we see as a global feature documentary about Stefan Marbury, who actually is in China, and that will kind of create a bridge between the Asian population and American audiences.
So talk about you do, obviously your slate looks very, what you've already made, and I know what you have in development. You're doing comedies, you're doing drama. I don't even know how to classify, sorry to bother you.
Yes.
But talk about what other projects you're working on, and what your vision is for your slate of work. I know you've also you've done Fruitvale, but you also have other sort of like life stories. You're doing Angela Davis.
That's right.
Your prior, and talk about you seem to dabble in sort of true stories and life stories a lot. So what's your vision for your slate of projects that you're developing?
I don't feel like I have a specialty in biopics. It just happens a certain when something
you're really good at it.
when there's an interesting subject matter, I think it's important to be told. I mean, Angela Davis, her story has to be told.
I mean, let's go.
Yeah, exactly.
We're waiting,
So there's that, and then there are other stories that are smaller stories, but to me is culturally significant, and that needs to be told. I'm developing an Asian American perspective story on Yuri Kochiyama, who's the Asian American activist, the premier Asian American activist alongside Malcolm X. I mean, that is important to me, and just the other night I was talking to Forest about it, and he's just like, shaping it, helping me how do we tell that story right, and how do we use that film to create solidarity amongst Asian Americans and African Americans. So there's the bigger ideas that we have, why we're producing something, why we want to pursue something. We have a film in talks with Netflix that will star Asian American kids. Just like everything that's important to us that we haven't really seen in the marketplace, we go after it. Sorry to bother you, no one was gonna touch that film. That's it, and we believed in it because of Boots Riley and his vision. He's a revolutionary filmmaker. A Black filmmaker doesn't get to make a movie like that.
No.
So, and he shopped it around for so many years that once we were able to back him, and then my core investors from Asia came along, the movie was going to get made.
Right.
And then now we get to launch his career and have an important voice like his in our community.
Right. And now it's okay to make a movie with Black people that's weird.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
It's now a thing.
It's now a thing. Exactly.
Which is awesome. So how do you, when you're coming up with these, when you're looking at your slate, like when do you start thinking about the end game? Like, do you already know, okay, like, this is, do you guys sort of template out a plan for, okay, these festivals, this distributor, like, is the target? Like, how far out do you sort of plan what your exhibition strategy for film from when you're working on it?
Well, that really depends on the size of the film, because certain projects are so much larger that an independent level will be pretty tough for us to put together without a distributor in place. There are ones that are kind of in the middle ground. Is it, selling foreign, but then we get the challenge of, oh, your films don't sell foreign, and then it's another big fight. And
then you have to not punch somebody in the face.
Exactly. So I think when it really depends on the story and the scale. We are scaling into the larger realm of budgeting, budgets, and we are working with certain studios. But when you do it on the independent level, I don't go as far as, oh, this is the perfect distributor for it. It's about getting that script right, getting that script to be compelling enough and important enough for us to greenlight it. Let's go into production. Can we make it independently? No? Okay, well, let's go to a few of our friends that we believe understands our voice.
Okay, great. So I want to talk a little bit about your advocacy around diversity in the industry, and one especially it's very close to my heart, is your passion about diversifying crew, below the line crew. Tell me a little bit about like just what you've noticed and the challenges that are there, and what you're actively doing to work on that, and how we can help.
Well, I feel like this is an important conversation to have, because you hear people talk about the inclusion rider and
Yes.
diversifying the below the line crew, but it's not that easy.
No.
Because when you have a union film, there are not that many people of color in the unions.
Right.
Right? So it's an issue. On Fruitvale, we were completely diversified because that was a non-union film. And it was everybody that believed in the project that came aboard and said, let's make this for Ryan. But thereafter, Forrest and I aren't really allowed to make non-union films anymore. And so we're actually an IATSE signatory. And I saw the challenges when I had to crew up. And I'm not talking about crewing up in a, non-diversified city. I'm talking about filming in Los Angeles. I'm talking about filming in Oakland and New York, where I couldn't crew up with many people of color, except for the PA positions. Right. So that was a real struggle for me. But whenever I do see someone of color in those positions, not the heads of departments, because that's my goal, is to have more heads of departments of color, but if a second AD is I'm sorry to bother you, I will go to him and I say, on your next film, can you please try to bring somebody under you who is African American or Latino or Asian? Just do that. And having those conversations with crew members really affect them, because they're kind of surprised that I would make a point to talk to them about doing that. And it kind of opens up just some ideas and also empathy and compassion through why I'm doing it. For Sorry to Bother You, a conscious effort that I made was I wanted a costume designer from New York. And she'll talk about this in many ways, but what happened was I saw a woman I worked with on Roxanne Roxanne. She was the assistant costume designer on Roxanne Roxanne. I'm like, man, she really knows her stuff. And she's African American. I said, how long have you been doing this? And she said, 18 years.
Wow.
And I'm like, wait, 18 years? You've been the assistant costume designer?
Wow.
So that really hit me hard. And so cut to Sorry to Bother You, as we were crewing up, I said, Boots, please meet her. Please meet Deirdre. And hopefully she will work out for you, because she's really talented. And then I was met with a lot of anger from my partners and producers saying, are you crazy? You're bringing somebody in from New York? That's gonna,
because financially.
Yeah, you're now gonna take a hit on your budget. And we have to not only put this person up, but there's per diem, there's flights, there's everything that comes when you bring someone from out of town. But what happened was, whenever I talk to Deirdre Govan, she actually cries.
Oh, Deirdre, I know Deirdre.
Yeah.
Oh my God, yes, I forgot about that. Yes.
Yeah. So when every time I talk to her, she actually cries, and I go, stop crying. And then she said, no one would give me that opportunity.
Yeah.
And she said, I still remember when you sent me the script and you wrote, kill it. And then I was like, I did? I forgot I did that, right? and then so of course she and Boots Riley got along so beautifully, and I made that conscious hit on the budget. And I'm like, you know what, it's okay. Because you know what, the film's gonna look great because of her.
Yeah.
And she was out there, and she did kill it. And every actor that worked with her were like, where did you find her? She's amazing.
She's amazing, yeah.
So after 18 years of being assistant costume designer, she's finally costume designer.
Yeah.
So.
I love that. I love that. And it speaks so much to just the power of that intentionality, that it's sort of just, we forget what we can personally do, because there's so much to do. Yeah. But sometimes it's just like, no, just full stop. I'm going to make this choice and just ride it out. And you can really, literally change someone's career and life and change their whole resume. And now she won't have to have that same fight again. But it takes someone just doing that.
Yeah.
So that's amazing. You had said that one of your goals as an Asian American producer was really sort of creating solidarity amongst,
Yes.
and you've talked about it here, especially even between the communities,
Yeah.
the African American community, Asian community, but creating solidarity and platforms. So, and off, telling people that they can call you to help you work out their deal. I'm sure that phone is ringing daily. But can you talk a little bit about, I know you and Mimi were creating something called the Meta Collective, and just some of the efforts that you're doing around just, building community for diverse artists.
Yeah, so Keisha's talking about Mimi Valdez, who's Pharrell Williams' producing partner.
Right.
She's one of my best friends and my sister, and we started working together on Dope, and then we did Roxanne Roxanne together, and we have a couple more films that we'll be collaborating together on. And she and I, and when we went through the sales process of our films, through Dope, through Roxanne, and I remember her sitting next to me, watching me go through the sale of Sorry to Bother You, and just at times, tears of anger, and because of just racist things that you hear, and then also, for example, I'll have, while I'm negotiating Sorry to Bother You, I'll have other Black filmmakers at Sundance texting me, saying we're getting lowballed for our films. We're getting, very, very, offensive offers for our films, and I'll be dealing with my problem, and then I'll text back and I'll say, hold the line, because as soon as other Black films, what people consider, are dropping, and their value
the whole marketplace changes.
So yeah, the whole market change, and it affects me and everybody else who's who produces and creates films starring people of color.
Right.
So it's that type of pain that allowed us to create this nonprofit called Meta Collective. People think it's a pot dispensary, just so you know. Anyway, but
because that lady needs one more of those, right?
Yeah, and I'm like, no, it's this nonprofit that Mimi and I created to help storytellers of color, and
that's also a pot dispensary.
Exactly, and we would. Our goal is like every quarter to get a dinner together, and a dinner it's a workshop, and it's about 3-4 hours of talking to each other, and we curate these groups. And the first dinner we had consisted of storytellers from the Latinx community, African American community, Native American Indian community, Asian American. So it was so nice that everybody looked at each other and looked at me and Mimi and said, you guys are crazy, right? but crazy, wonderful.
In a good way, yeah.
That you're putting these creatives together, and I'm like, because I think we all need to work with each other, and as we do that, we create more leverage
100%.
and power in the industry, and many of the creative people are still in touch with each other, and we just have to figure out how to push that agenda forward, and we share stories of what we go through in selling a film, because there's a lot of tactics involved. I learned so much from the sales agents I work with at Endeavor, but learning that process, I was just like, man, if I wasn't a producer, I'll probably be a sales agent, and I'll probably be in there fighting
You
everybody.
would be the most in-demand sales agent ever.
I'll be like screaming at everybody, but I was like, that's what I would do, because there's so much strategy.
Sure. Yes.
So much strategy involved, and also knowing how to work with creative people, with artists and stuff like that. But that's why Meta Collective was created, and we will definitely be going forward to do more events that will involve, a multitude of creative people.
Great.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm gonna let questions happen in just 1 minute. I just have one or two closing questions for you. Who do you feel is like a Ryan Coogler today that isn't Ryan Coogler? Is there any directors that you're looking at that you just know are amazing that the world doesn't know about yet?
Yes, and I can't
You can't tell us?
tell you guys. Yes, because there are so many wonderful filmmakers coming up.
Yeah.
And luckily I'm in a position where professors from NYU and from USC would say, there's a couple of filmmakers you should look at. And it's wonderful to be able to have that kind of pool of talent and people like a feeder or Sundance or San Francisco Film. They'll be like, oh, do you know about this filmmaker? And I actually mentor one filmmaker one filmmaker every semester at USC. You know, so to be able to have my finger on the pulse is really important. There are a few people that I know that has real talent by seeing their short films, but it's about how do they adapt that talent into a feature film.
Right.
How can I help them and get to, you know, to a certain place? But a lot of it, by watching the short films, you know someone has some raw talent that can be shaped and groomed and become really great. But Ryan Coogler, that's a tough thing to follow, because he's one of those one-of-a-kind.
He's a singular talent.
Yeah, one of a kind. He was destined, you know, to be great. So.
And what's your one piece of advice for young producers who are, you know, just starting out? Like, what do you wish someone would have told you when you were on set learning?
Yeah, for young producers, I feel that you really have to understand art and commerce. You know, because I meet producers that only understand logistical producing,
right,
and then only creative producing or only finance. If you can understand the entire process of procuring concept IP idea to developing a wonderful screenplay, to raising money and what that means, to physically producing a film, to understand post-production, to understand the sales process, and to understand how to deliver a film to a studio, which is hell.
Yeah.
But if you know that entire process, you become a really valuable producer in the marketplace.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I want to open it up to questions, which I'm sure are burning in the hearts and minds of these young people I can't see. I saw someone.
Yeah, we can't see anybody.
Way in the back.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Rafael. I'm a film producer from Brazil, based in LA. And my main questions regarding the advice that you just gave is, what was a big challenge that you had with one of your films while you were searching for finance, and how did you overcome that?
I think I usually have the finance locked in before, you know, we go into production, but challenges for me are always because they're first-time filmmakers I work with, and that a lot of people have been fed, investors been fed, that you're not supposed to bet on first-time filmmakers. Or if you're betting on a first-time filmmaker, your budget needs to be $10, right? So that's the problem, and that's the challenge that I would face, is to convince whoever it is that it's important, why this filmmaker is important, why they're worth the investment, and what I can do as a producer to put as many added elements in that creates value. And that's how you overcome it. But many of my investors I work with, they all say it's just, they feel my commitment and my conviction to the storytelling, and that I'm kind of mean at times, and they like that.
There's a, do you have a mic? Yeah. Sorry, okay, I didn't even see that, sorry.
No,
I'll do
my name is Layla. I'm a filmmaker and a grad student at York in the film production, and I attended one of the conferences yesterday with big corporate execs who kept repeating that we're only going to be producing films that audiences want to see. And so I've been asking this question at various different conferences. One, how do we know what audiences want to see? Like, is there actual research that's going into figuring that out? Two, how do we get access as BIPOC, Black and Indigenous and people of color? Like, how do we get access into the mainstream? And just kind of like, maybe you can share some advice, both of you really.
When people say that they're only going to make movies that what people want to see,
Or that audiences want to see. My question is, what audience? Really?
Yeah.
Like, because there are audiences that haven't been addressed and haven't been spoken to that are clearly desperate to be spoken to. So I would take that and reinterpret it like, cool, got you, bet. I'm going to get that audience, son, and let's go.
Yeah, no, it's, you know, a lot of times there are data out there that says this and that, but if I follow the data, I wouldn't have made the films that I had. You know, that's the thing. Sorry to Bother You would never have been made because someone says that's too crazy. But I do remember that when we produced Roxanne Roxanne, during the sales process where I said when there are times where I feel so much anger and just tears is because when someone says, well, it's really tough that you're trying to sell a film about a young black girl. Who's your audience? And you're just like mind blown. And she's not a star. And I'm like, does Mahershala Ali mean anything or Nia Long? And it really doesn't in that sales process, and it's painful. But what's great is when Netflix came in and said, we'll take it, and I'm like, oh, cool. And then later on finding out that 10 million people watched the film.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible. So.
Yeah, you got that, but I just want to make sure she gets the mic eventually. No, yeah, sorry.
My name is Sherry Scott. I am a writer-producer from Atlanta, Georgia. And as you know, Atlanta is this burgeoning film scene, but one of the things that we've been talking about as creatives in that space is that ideas aren't being greenlit from Atlanta. Even Atlanta, the show, the writers moved to LA to write it. So it's kind of a two-parter. One, I would love to talk to you about bringing Meta Collective to Atlanta and sitting down with some of the creatives there who have ideas and who want to get this out there. But two, what is the secret sauce? Do we have to move, to get our projects greenlit and produced?
You do not have to move because films don't really get made in LA, right? So I think that it's about finding your allies, leveraging who you know in Atlanta to be able to have your project be seen. But yes, I will talk to Mimi about bringing something to Atlanta because that way we can meet creatives from different parts of the country. Yeah, for sure. But you do not have to move. Yeah, and actually Atlanta has such a vibrant production community that you're so much better off than many other regions in the country. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Hi.
Can you stand
Yeah,
so we can see you?
sure. Hi, my name is Nini. I might cry. The first time I watched Fruitvale, I saw your name and I was like, who's Nina Yang? And I looked you up and I've been watching your journey ever since. And for me, I think and a lot of Black, Indigenous, other filmmakers of color, especially young folks from our generation, can attest to the fact that it's really hard to get films made in Canada, especially with there's more people in California than there is all of Canada. I just followed your career, and for me, I always saw a lot of filmmakers of color, but they'd always have white producers, oftentimes white women, which I have great allies that I've worked with, but for me, here's one of my producing partners, Simone Ince, but I knew at that point that when I was seeing that over and over again, that it was so important to have a producer, because that's the person you work with the closest to have by your side who really gets you. And between you and Tillane Jones, I was like, oh, it's possible. And so I just want to say, I know it sounds weird, but thank you, because it's so important for us to not just see representation on screen, but to watch those credits and see names, and you're like, who is that person? That name looks different. Let me look them up. Let me look up their trajectory, their career. And so that's really beautiful. That's one thing I wanted to say. And we'd love to bring Meta Collective to Toronto, because we have a whole collective. There's a lot of amazing groups here, Black Women Film, Real World Film Festival. There's a lot of people here that would love to bring you into a room with us, so we can have a real conversation with you. I think that's important. But my question for you is really simple. You work with a lot of first-time directors. We just got funding for our first feature, or the first set of funding, and so shout out to Telefilm, Talent to Watch. But my question for you is, having worked with so many first-time filmmakers or first-time feature filmmakers, what's the advice that you would give to that first-time person? Because you get anxiety, you have imposter syndrome, which is so real, and you're just kind of nervous, but you have this project that you've been waiting 5, 10, 15 years to tell, it's worth it. So what's the advice you would give to a first-time filmmaker?
Thank you. Were you on Twitter? Yeah. Oh my God. I was just like, who is this? I'm like, I recognize you. But first of all, thank you. You make me want to cry because, after Fruitvale, we're doing a lot of press, and I was always in the back. And I remember Octavia Spencer called me, yelling at me, and say, I need you to be in the front. I need you to show up And I said, no, it's about the actors, it's about the director. And she's like, no, I need you to be there because I want other young women of color to see what you're doing. And she really made me do that to the point where we were going to some red carpet events, and she said, she'll text me, goes, where are you? I will walk with you. I'm not allowing you to sneak around to the back. And for her to do that really opened my eyes, because when I started going to these events with her, young women of color would line up to talk to me. Not to Michael B. Jordan, to me. So I was like, wow, this is amazing. And she was right. And for you to say that, it means a lot to me. And you know, I want to inspire that all young women of color that we can do this. This could be a career for us. And my advice for first-time director is don't attach 1,000 producers on to your project before you get it made. Because that's a very common thing that happens. Because sometimes when I get these projects, and then they're like, there's 12 producers attached. I'm like, and they couldn't get the film made, huh? No, you know? It's like, so don't attach a ton of producers. Do your homework. Find your allies that will be there. And to be truthful, instead of just telling you have a great project. It's like to be truthful, like, you know what? This is challenging because of these elements, but what can we do to solve these problems so you can get your film made? You know, so that I had talked to filmmakers who been told by their producing team that they have the greatest project in the world and they're gonna be a huge filmmaker, and then this woman director talked to me and I broke it down, and then she started crying, and I said, why are you crying? She goes, because no one told me the truth. You know, of how hard this journey is. But now she's better prepared to go on the right path instead of have a bunch of people who kind of want to write off of her coattail. You know, so don't attach a ton of producers. Before you sign away your rights, talk to an attorney, you know, and if you can't afford attorney, call Meta Collective.
Now a global nonprofit organization.
So, yeah. You're welcome.
I think we had one more.
Hi. Hi. Is this on? My name is Molly, and I am a dancer and an actress from Germany. Now it's on. Thank you. Based in Los Angeles, and you seem to be a person who loves to give other people from minorities opportunities. And my question is, do you have an advice, for people of color, or from an Asian community, or from Europe, that are underrepresented in one way or another? How can people from these groups create opportunities for themselves if they're not in a lucky position to find someone like you to help them be heard?
I think that now with technology, doesn't matter where you are in parts of the world, you can create short films and showcase your talent, and people will be able to see it through social media. And if you can, I always tell people, whether it's actors or especially filmmakers, is we find a lot of talent through short films. You can see when somebody is a storyteller, when you can see when someone has natural talent being an actor. You know, Shantae Adams for Roxanne Roxanne, that was her first movie. That was her first audition. So just seeing her, having a tape out in the world, and we saw the tape, we're like, my God, let's bring her in. Right? And then she was able to audition and got the role. So it's not impossible. With technology today, you can showcase your talent, through.
Is that it? Okay, sorry. I think that's our time. Thank you, Nina.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Nina, thank you